Good morning, everyone. Welcome to West Central's First Friday event. My name is Monica Robbins, and I will be introducing our guest speakers today. We'll be learning a little bit about navigating disability in college and beyond. So I want to cover a few housekeeping reminders before I introduce our speakers this morning. Feel free to ask any questions you may have as we proceed through the presentation, and drop those questions in the Q&A section on our Zoom interface. Time is reserved at the end to answer any questions that may be presented or not addressed. If we're unable to answer those questions during the event, I ask that you please put your contact information, your name and contact, so that we can circle back with you and provide any additional information. Closed captioning is available by selecting the CC closed caption button, and then the show subtitle or view full transcript. So now I'm going to introduce Miss Julie Alexander, Angela Roman, and Michelle Albright from Ferris State University, who will talk to us about navigating disability in college and beyond. Take it away, Julie.
Thank you very much, Monica. Good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Alexander. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Accessibility and Disability Services at Ferris State University. I oversee the Office of Educational Counseling and Disability Services. And today we're talking about the transition trail, because coming from K through 12 system into higher ed and navigating disability can be challenging because there are a lot of differences. So I'm going to talk about and kind of explain those today. And then I have some fantastic, amazing colleagues that are going to talk about preparing students for beyond college and some of the services that they provide that way. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about what access and disability looks like in the K through 12 setting. So both in secondary and post-secondary education, there are laws that protect students' rights. So the rights of students with disabilities. In K through 12, what that looks like is there are two different tracks. One is special education, and that comes from IDEA, which is a legislation that is pertains to the K through 12 system. And that leads to an individualized education plan. So that includes accommodations and modifications. And schools have an obligation to identify students with disabilities and to make sure that they have the education that is most appropriate for them. So that's something that's on the school that they are figuring out. Now, some students may need accommodations, need some access, but they don't necessarily need special education services. So they might have a 504 plan. And that comes out of Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, which does pertain to us in higher ed. But that's accommodations only. So some of the differences between accommodations and modifications, accommodations don't alter the curriculum in any way. So students are still completing the same work, the same amount of work as their peers. They just might need some accommodations to make that happen. So extra time to take a test is the perfect example because it's not changing the test in any way, but it's just giving some extra time. Also, if a student has a learning disability that affects reading, maybe they need to hear the exact same test questions out loud. They're not reworded, they're not phrased differently. It's the same question, but they just need to hear it rather than read it. So modifications that you might see in special education in K through 12 are a little bit different. They might be things like changing the test questions around, reducing the number of math problems a student has to complete, just changing the curriculum in some way so that all students have the opportunity to be successful. So as I mentioned before, in K through 12, they do screen for concerns. They're going to intervene and gather data and evaluate at the expense of the school. There are eligibility meetings, and I'm going to talk about later why it's important to include the student in those meetings and empower them in those meetings as much as possible. But then that will lead to either an IEP or a 504 plan. Sometimes students have both. They start out with an IEP and it transitions into a 504 plan. But those are reviewed. IEPs reviewed every year, revisiting eligibility every 3 years, 504 plans revisited periodically. So that was kind of a brief overview of K through 12. So I'm going to talk about how it is different once students get to college. So every institution of higher education has an office like mine. They might go by different names. We're Educational Counseling and Disability Services. So we have disability in the title. That is helpful. There are some places where it's Office of Accessibility. And sometimes people don't know what that means if they're not in the disability world. There's a lot of places that it's the Disability Resource Center. That's very common. But you may have to do some digging because at all of those institutions, the student must come to the office. They have to self-identify. So that's something that's very different from the K through 12. IEPs and 504s do not automatically roll over. We don't get that information automatically. Students have to come and they have to do what we call the interactive process. So that means they got to provide us documentation. We got to have a conversation, learn all about them. So it's kind of like starting all over in a way, and figuring out what is appropriate in college. That doesn't mean we don't look at IEPs or 504 plans. That's relevant information, but it's not going to be exactly the same in college. So those things do go away. So again, some of those differences. Students have to self-identify. That's a big one. They have to come to us and they have to provide us with documentation. We don't do screenings or evaluations. We don't provide psychoeducational testing. So that's something students have to come to. Another big transition for students that can be hard in K through 12, a lot of people do the communicating for them. The school communicates with teachers. In higher ed, the student has a responsibility to communicate with their instructors. Yes, we provide a letter, but then we expect the student to go and talk to professors. And I understand how intimidating that can be for students, especially because there's, a power dynamic there. And which is why I always offer, I can go with you. I can talk to your professor with you if you need to, but you've got to, communicate with your professors. You got to choose whether or not you're going to use these accommodations. So there's a lot more responsibility on the students. We're only providing accommodations and we cannot change the curriculum. Students are going to be responsible for the same amount of work, and the same quality of work, the same rigor of work. All of that is going to be the same. We don't have a formal title for access plans. We just call it accommodations. So, I'll get students that will tell their professors sometimes, I have a 504 plan. It's in my 504. And it's like, no, you don't have a 504, you have accommodations. And so kind of changing that language a little bit. We're not under IDEA anymore. We're under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we're still under Section 504. In K through 12, things are modified to make sure that everybody can succeed. In college, we are eliminating disability barriers as much as possible without fundamentally altering the curriculum. So we ensure that the student has access, but we don't make it so that they necessarily can succeed. They will have to, the success is on their own. So they're responsible for their own success. So with that in mind, some ways that I think it's important to support transition for students pre-college before they come to college. One of the big things is, as much as possible, involve students in their IEP and 504 plan meetings, encourage them to talk and have conversations with them about their disability. So a lot of times when I'm meeting with incoming freshmen, the parents will do a lot of the talking, or I'll ask a question and the student will look at their parent, which is fine. You know, it's a transition, and, you know, in that first meeting, it's pretty normal for parents to be there. But we want to encourage as much as possible the student to be able to be answering a lot of those questions and to be talking about, this is how my condition affects me. This is what I need in order to, you know, succeed in college, to be able to talk about that. So having conversations about, you know, how does your disability affect you? What does it mean to have a learning disability? What doesn't it mean? A lot of students just believe that they're not as smart as their peers, which is not the case. It's just they might learn differently, or they might have some deficits in very specific areas, and understanding what that means and what that doesn't mean, I think is very important, so that students know how to be a self-advocate, because they're going to need to have those skills. We'll help them with those skills as much as possible in college, but they're certainly going to need that, you know, as they go beyond college. Another thing is, I think it is so important to cultivate a sense of disability pride. And how do we do that? I get so many students coming in, they're reluctant to come to my office because they are so excited to be able to shed that label. Like, I don't want to be associated with disability in any way. I want to be normal. I want to be just like everybody else. I don't want to do anything special when it comes to taking tests. And that's unfortunate, because disability is not something to be ashamed of. The reason disability exists is because the world is designed for people with certain abilities. You know, whether or not you can take a test in 50 minutes, it does not really mean that you can do college work, or you can't, right? So cultivating in students a sense of pride, like disability is not a bad thing. It's actually kind of a badge of honor, because it's meant that you've had to navigate a world that wasn't necessarily designed for you. So how do we cultivate that sense of pride, especially if students might feel isolated or might not know a lot of other people with disabilities? Well, exposing them to disability culture, which is out there. Maybe you've heard of DisArt in Grand Rapids. If you haven't, I highly encourage everybody to check out their website, DisArt Now. So it's DISARTNOW.org. What DisArt is they are an organization that supports disability culture and disability community, and they're really changing the narrative of disability. And so I think that, you know, everybody should check that out and start thinking about disability differently. you're not so big into the arts, another way to do that, if you've seen the Netflix documentary Crip Camp, featuring Judy Heumann, an important historical disability rights activist. Check that out also. I think that's helpful in helping people cultivate a sense of pride and being part of that disability community. So connecting, another thing is connecting students with disability offices at colleges of interest. So when students come for college days or meetings, taking some time out to meet with the disability office and seeing what they're all about and what they need to do to get started at each of those colleges. Another thing I like to tell everybody kind of pre-college is when it comes to documentation, we try to be pretty flexible at fairs because we don't want to put extra barriers on students, certainly don't want to put financial barriers on them. So, we'll look at like IEPs and 504 plans and even old documentation that, maybe they were tested in middle school or elementary school. But it is important that you get documentation, especially if it's psychoeducational testing that reflects adult norms. And I just had a conversation with one of our counselors this morning about a student who is applying for accommodations on a teaching exam to get their teaching license. And they have very specific requirements about how old that documentation can be. And so I encourage, if you can, getting retested and making sure that that testing is up to date and, reflects adult norms, so that even if you can get accommodations in college, that you'll be able to get accommodations on board exams, standardized assessments, things like that. I also encourage documenting any formal or informal accommodations. I've talked to a lot of students that, don't have any documentation, but they had teachers in high school just give them a little extra time or let them test in a different environment, but there's no record of that. It's important to have a record of that because that can be helpful when seeking accommodations in the future. Okay, so what are we looking for when it comes to documentation? So these are some of the elements that we ask for. We want things, if it's something coming from a healthcare professional, we want something on a letterhead, dated and signed. It should clearly identify what the condition or diagnosis is, and how that diagnosis was determined. So what assessments, how was this person assessed? I already talked about adult norms and why that is important. But most importantly, what we are most looking for is what is the impact of symptoms or condition, whether that's like a learning disability or ADHD. How does that impact this student? That's more important than what a label says. And we have a growing number of students with chronic medical conditions, health conditions. And so understanding that severity and the prognosis, what that's going to look like, is important, as well as like frequency and duration of active symptoms. So how often is that person having symptoms that are impacting them in school? And of course, any side effects of medication, treatment, things like that. So sometimes people also ask, what are these accommodations that we're talking about? And what kinds of things do we hear, especially incoming freshmen, ask about that we can't do? Okay, so our most common accommodations, this is certainly not an exhaustive list because accommodations are always determined through an individual assessment. So it's highly tailored to the individual. But most commonly what we see are things like extended test time, a distraction reduced environment for exams, so testing in a different space, a lot of permission to record lecture or use of some type of note-taking tools to help with any barriers with taking their own notes, making sure that materials are accessible, especially if the student uses like a screen reader. If they have a visual impairment, we want to make sure all their materials are accessible. And accessible communication. So that might be sign language interpreters or captioning, things like that. We also get a lot of questions about supports maybe student has had in the past that we don't necessarily provide as an accommodation. So shortened assignments, the student is going to be responsible for the same amount of work as everybody else. So that when they graduate, with a Ferris degree, they can say, I did everything that all of my peers did. And it was just as rigorous and I could do it. Sometimes students or parents will ask about, well, what about additional explanation of a test question, rewording of test questions, or additional explanation about an assignment. Those aren't accommodations that we provide. So, if they need to hear it out loud, that could be an accommodation. But rewording or providing additional explanation is not. I am very proud to say that at Ferris, we have an excellent tutoring center. We provide tutoring for most of our subjects. If we don't have a tutor already, we can find a tutor. But it's not an accommodation. So that's something that I sometimes have to make very clear, is that tutoring's not something that is an accommodation for students. It's a support, and our office will help connect a student sometimes to the tutoring center, advocate for them as far as getting a tutor, but we don't require it as an accommodation. Academic coaching, that's another thing that we get asked about. The student needs somebody to kind of stay on top of them, make sure they're working on their assignments, make sure they're, have what they need as far as time management. We do have educational counselors who will meet with students on a regular basis, but it's not an accommodation that we provide. That's something that is available to all students. Sometimes it's not as intensive as I think parents wish it would be. But we can help all students with some strategies to help them in school. Another thing I get asked about a lot is instructor notes. That's not something we can ask for from the professor, or extra one-on-one attention from the instructor, which is not something we can provide. Professors do have office hours, make themselves available to all students, but we can't make them as an accommodation spend more time with any one student. So those are things we get asked about a lot, and it's important to understand coming into college that those should not be expectations. Okay, so at Ferris, how we notify instructors, we have what we call a course accessibility letter, which lists what the student's accommodations are. And the student goes through our online portal to select which classes they want the professor to be notified of their accommodations in. And then the professor will get an email from our office with a link to that course accessibility letter. So as I mentioned before, it is the responsibility of the student to communicate with their professors. This is kind of the first step in that. So we don't make students, take the piece of paper physically to their professors. Sometimes that can be a little bit stigmatizing if they're doing that like during class, handing them a letter. So they can do it online, but we still encourage students to follow up with their professors and meet with them. And in some cases, we insist on it, because if it's an accommodation having to do with attendance, then we're going to need to talk to the professor, because that is going to look different in every class depending on the course design. So again, I always offer to go with students to have those meetings, because I understand that there's a power difference there. When you're talking to somebody who's in control of your grade, that can be very intimidating. And so we will support the student and go with them in those cases. Students are also responsible for scheduling their own exams. And that's an added thing that students have to do that maybe they haven't had to do in the past. And it's also something that they can do on our online portal. So I have up on the screen here what our online portal looks like. Students can get to this through their MyFSU, which is how they access a number of things at Ferris. But the icons on here, going from left to right, they can schedule a test or an exam. They can view their calendar, which is their appointments and exams with our office. They can schedule an appointment with a counselor. There's an online intake form that new students can complete, and then self-registration. We explain this to them every semester. That's where they go in and pick what accommodations they want for each class. So something that they have to do every semester. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to take a little bit of a break and turn it over to my colleagues to talk about career and professional success. We're very fortunate on our campus that we have such a great office to help students with their overall career plans and what they want to do as they move on from Ferris. So I'm going to mute myself and turn off my video.
Thank you, Julie. And good morning, everyone. I'm Angela Roman, and I'm director of the Career and Professional Success office at Ferris State. And then I have joining me Michelle Albright. She's our career readiness specialist and employer liaison, and she works with the bulk of students in their career readiness. So she's going to have the bulk of the presentation today. So I just wanted to introduce how we work at Ferris and the services we offer for students. But first, I want you all to know that my personal and professional belief is that all people should be able to have the occupation they enjoy. So since people choose college to get or meet their career goals, it was important to us to make sure that we talked in this presentation about career readiness and the services that are typically offered to all students in college. And we can guarantee students who take part in our services, and it is also their responsibility to come and take part in those services, it will maximize their success and transition to the workplace or whatever other first destination they choose. And you can move it to the next slide, Julie. So career development is an ongoing and lifelong process. So it starts over and over and over again. And it takes part, or the process is that a person assesses themselves. They'll look at career options. They'll look at labor market. They'll look at a workplace culture or their culture, the lifestyle that they want to obtain. and then use all of those things to get their or meet their career goals. At Ferris, we use a holistic life design approach to this. So we get to know our students through conversations, through assessments, through mind mapping, and through understanding barriers and interests. Once a student has some career options in mind, then we'll talk to them about engaging in developing their skills and testing out career opportunities through things like such as job shadowing. The students will take part in these opportunities through usually a couple years, and that will help them clarify their career goals, help them commit to those career goals, and then helps them gain skills that they'll showcase to employers when they're ready to go into the workplace. Finally, we help students prepare to network with others and obtain their first destination after college. Our services are available to Ferris alum for free and for life. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and she's going to share a lot more details about how we do this work.
Thank you, Angela. So you can go ahead and advance the next slide, please. So how we provide career assistance is, as Angela mentioned, through personalized coaching. And one of the beginning steps of that may be mind mapping. And to give you a little more information about how we use mind mapping is a process to help individuals to understand concepts by breaking them down into smaller, digestible thoughts. It's a process that is used to develop both new ideas and organize existing ideas. And it provides a great way to be flexible, but also help focus support areas as students or job seekers explore themselves, their interests, and their opportunities. In regards to career assistance, Angela mentioned, we provide students with a number of different opportunities to experience not only what occupations may be like, but also to develop transferable skill sets or employability skills. This may include programming, events, volunteerism, leadership opportunities, student employment, job shadowing, and a whole host of other experiential learning type opportunities that get the students out interacting in different environments with people who have similar interests to form opinions and ideas about what those types of roles may be. Then we assist students in reflecting on their experiences and present them with ways to strengthen their marketability or their toolbox for employment. And so through the use or through services that are both in-person and technology-based, we provide the ability for students to research, to find trend data, occupational information, gain confidence with their presentation skills, and to network also virtually as well as in person, connecting job seekers with meaningful connections to professionals, professional organizations, alumni, and peers. So regular check-ins are important in the process of facilitating career services. Our services are facilitated through two primary relationship philosophies. One is life design, and the other is career transitional coaching. Life design coaching supports students through the process of navigating decisions and choices. As we know, life is full of uncertainties, twists, and changes, and so are career trajectories. Career readiness or transitional coaching supports students who have a focus on career decisions and choices, but seek support and further understanding and resources to prepare them for their next destination. Through coaching, we're able to provide individualized attention, regular check-ins, deeper discussions, and sometimes realignment of options for students, as well as just-in-time services. So it's not a one and done relationship in most situations regarding career coaching. Another way, and you may change the slide here, please. Another way that we provide career service is through traditional basic career services, which include personal branding and presentation of employment readiness through articulation in writing and verbally. The two main ways that we do this is through helping with job search document reviews, resumes, cover letters, e-portfolios, letters of application for admissions, and review of online profiles. The second main way that we provide traditional career services is through interviewing practice for various types of settings, through various means, and for different purposes. These may include the use of video audio practice programs and in-person sessions with professionals and employers. Networking is also a very large piece of connecting students with amazing opportunities to explore and gain skills and further their transition post-graduation. So networking, both personally and virtually, we help students develop strategies to create relationships, knowing that relationships are the means through which all of us gain the ability to learn, practice, and achieve meaningful experiences and purposeful roles. Our goal is to support job seekers with knowledge, confidence, and experiences to move forward both in life and into a rewarding career. And so our services at Ferris, we provide them free for life to Ferris students and alumni. This is a unique service. Many institutions will charge alumni for services once they've graduated. Our philosophy here is once a bulldog, always a bulldog. And so we are happy to help anyone who comes to us seeking assistance with navigating their next moves, whether those results are from changes or promotions. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you both so much. The Career and Professional Success Office is a great partner for us. And in educational counseling and disability services, our main goal, our main mission is to make sure that students have access to their education. But we also recognize that the whole reason they're here usually to get that education is because they are hoping to get a job after they leave Ferris. And so having the CAPS office here that we can send students and work with them is very important. We also have conversations with students sometimes about requesting accommodations in the workplace and what that looks like, because that is another place where they're entitled to some accommodations, but asking for that and figuring that out can be a little bit challenging. So, we help them to kind of work through that. And we also partner with some other great people in the community. like MRS, of course, one of our favorite partners. And we do a lot of cross referral there. We also work with the Bureau for Services for Blind Persons, BSBP. Very helpful. And both of those organizations are very focused on making sure that people with disabilities get employed, that get gainful, meaningful employment. And we want to make sure that they're, working to their potential. Another excellent partner that we work with is Disability Advocates of Kent County. They serve Mecosta County as well. And we've had the pleasure of further developing that partnership and that resource, which is very helpful for our students in advocating for them in many areas of life. It might be employment, it might be housing, it might be transportation. Disability Advocates helps with all of those things. So they really are fantastic. So I'm glad that we have plenty of time today for some questions, because some may have come up as we were talking. I see a couple in the Q&A. And so, yeah, we'll take your questions at this time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that information, everyone. We really want to say thank you to Ferris, Julie, Michelle, and Angela for being willing to come here and talk a little bit more, providing us some insight regarding, navigating that college disability service resource engagement. So yes, this is specific to Ferris. However, it is a high-level overview of what you can anticipate and expect at any post-secondary institution. So we thank you. So some of the questions that were presented here, Courtney, would you mind highlighting a couple of those?
Absolutely. So the first question that came in is, what do you see as the biggest barrier for freshmen coming into college with a disability?
Okay, the biggest barrier, and that can vary so much. And so I'm gonna kind of reiterate what I've talked about before, because I think the biggest barrier is not understanding some of the differences between high school and college, and not being comfortable with self-advocacy, is a huge barrier. We work hard to try to make our office visible. We have a table at orientation. We try to make students aware through, Disability Awareness Month, and going to classes, that we're here and you can come and talk to us. But sometimes they just don't know where the office is, or they might feel intimidated to come. Also, I talked a little bit about stigma. I think that that's also a huge barrier that students face, because they don't want to be seen as different. They don't want to be seen as needing anything different. So that can be a huge barrier. As far as, institutional barriers, I think, the way college courses are traditionally designed with an emphasis on exams, and exams tend to be more important in college than maybe they were in high school. And as you get into higher level classes, the students might take classes where their grade is completely dependent on exams, and they don't have any homework or buffers or things like that. And again, our biggest accommodations are related to exams. And so those are some barriers that students face. But there are quite a few of them, just depending on the student and depending on what their specific circumstances, their condition is, their diagnosis is. So all kinds of barriers that they might face. But I think the common thread is just being able to navigate the system, to know where to go to ask for help.
Thank you, Julie. The next question that came in is, if a student was an MRS customer, will they still need to participate in job readiness programming again?
I can take this one. I think all the help and preparation you can get will be beneficial. But our services, and typically at all institutions, are on up to the student to participate. So if they are ready, know what their career aspirations are, they know what skills they need to gain, they're already chatting with employers and preparing, and they're getting interviews, and there's likely no reason to come in and use our services. But if students find themselves hitting a barrier that they need help with, we're here. They can come in and just get their resume looked at, or they can come in as a first-year student and talk with someone to help understand where they're at, create a plan, when they might want to come back and see us as they go throughout their time in their education path. And then we'll help them into employment and beyond. So I think I would at least recommend one visit to talk with that institution's career specialist, just to make sure that they understand what happens at that institution and how best they can use those services there.
All right, thank you, Angie. The next question is, if a student with a learning disability goes to college and does not immediately access the disability supports office and then starts to struggle academically, what do you advise as a next step?
I advise coming to the disability office as soon as possible. But we do have a lot of students that don't come to us right away, either because they didn't know we were here, or they try to do it on their own, want to shed that stigma. And then we get a lot of students mid-semester coming to us. I think it is important to note that accommodations are not retroactive, so they can't go back and retake those tests. So that's why, coming and getting the help as soon as possible is really important. That said, they also have the right to come at any point. So even if it's like the week before finals and you realize I need accommodations, we can still put those in place at the end of the semester. But it's only going to affect those tests at the end of the semester. So, yeah, and then utilizing other supports, I would advise that also, make use of the tutoring center. We have free centralized tutoring here. We don't have that everywhere. So that's something I would, highly encourage also, as well as visiting professors during their office hours, just making use of all of the resources that are available.
Thank you, Julie. I know as a counselor who works with transition youth and college youth or college students, one of the big things that I encourage is, before you start anything, you go see the disability services office. So there's that there for them. The next question is, I'm wondering about whether there are any accommodations available for physical disabilities. Assistance getting across campus in a wheelchair, for instance.
Okay, that's a great question. We do have accommodations for physical disabilities, and those are things like making sure that classrooms are accessible, making sure that housing is accessible. So if they need housing accommodations, if they need accommodations in the classroom, making sure that those are barrier free, that our buildings are barrier free. We also will give priority registration so that students can register early for classes to make sure that they have enough time to get to their next class if it's going to take them a little bit more time. Some things that we don't provide, I think is important to note. Personal attendance, we can't provide that. transportation services, we can't provide that. So sometimes that getting across campus, students have to kind of figure that out. But as far as making sure that the buildings themselves are accessible, we will do that. Making sure they have time in between, we will do that. We can help them if they need to figure out an alternative bus system, we can work with that. But there are some things that the student will probably have to think about as far as navigating the campus before they come.
All right, and then the last question we have is, does Ferris's disability office do any collaboration with the diversity office? Disability is part of diversity, and perhaps this collaboration can help address the disability stigma if students are welcome in the diversity space. And I'll let you answer that, Julie.
Yes, absolutely. So we do work with our Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Strategic Planning. And I'm very pleased that we're going to have a meeting coming up soon with the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion and one of our students who has some ideas about how we might be able to support personal care attendance. And, he's open to listening to our ideas. He met with our liaison committee for students with disabilities and took some ideas there. I also sit on the university-wide diversity inclusion team, as well as the campus climate team. I've also just recently started reaching out to our various identity centers to see how we can work together to address issues of intersectionality. So that's, always a work in progress. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. Yes, disability is definitely a part of diversity. And it's something that we need to pay attention to if we want to say that we are a welcoming, inclusive, equitable campus that provides us a space of belonging for all students. Then we have to be including people with disabilities in those conversations. So excellent point. Thank you for the question.
Thank you again. The next question that came in is, can a person bring their own personal care attendant into classes with them?
Yes. Yes, they certainly can. So what we can do, I said we don't provide personal care attendants, but we do make sure that personal care attendants have access. So if they need access to the residence halls, or if they need, an extra seat in the classroom, those are things that we can provide and we can do.
And that is all I'm showing for questions, unless anyone would like to submit anything else right now.
Yeah, it doesn't look like
Oh,
there's any additional. Is there another one?
Yep, one just
Okay.
popped in.
All right.
Is there any training provided to Ferris instructors and staff to educate them on disability awareness and accommodations?
Yes, just did one, I think October 11th. I co-presented with our Director of Equal Opportunity, and this was specifically for faculty. I'm also hoping it's on my to-do list to reach out to the faculty and residents for our Faculty Center for Teaching and Learning to talk about some more training opportunities there and what we might be able to provide. We take part in some sessions for new faculty at the beginning of the semester. There's definitely more that we can do there. We can't make the trainings mandatory. I wish we could do that. But that's definitely a huge effort that we have and something that we are trying to do more of. So again, thank you for that question.
All right, thank you, Julie. All right, no more questions popping up right now.
Super. Julie, do you have a contact information in the presentation here? So again, we just want to really thank everybody for their participation in this information share. I think this is really helpful and powerful. A lot of the work that's being done between Career Service Office and Julie's office parallels with the work that we do, certainly. So the importance of guidance and counseling, working with our customers to empower them to, take ownership of understanding their disability and some of the functional limitations associated with that. What are their strengths and abilities? Being able to self-advocate and engaging, as Julie said, in that interactive process for requesting accommodation. It very much so aligns with that same art of engagement as they transition from college to a career. So we are very appreciative of this information shared today. I know all of the ladies here from Ferris would be happy to speak with anybody who has additional questions. And with that being said, I think we may be giving you the gift of 5 minutes back in your day. So thank you, everybody, for attending West Central's First Friday. Have a great weekend.
I just wanted to reach out to Ebony real quickly and let her know that we received her question. We responded back in a private message, so she can look for that.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye, everyone.